My father cut me out of his will because women don't need property. So I handed my lawyer the one document he forgot existed. I found my father's will while cleaning out his home office after his heart attack, and discovered he left everything to my brother Kevin, who hasn't worked in 6 years because women get provided for by their husbands. I wasn't supposed to be in his office. He was in the hospital, stable but weak, and someone needed to find his insurance papers. Kevin was too busy playing video games in his childhood bedroom to help. So there I was, going through Dad's files when I found the envelope marked Last Will and Testament. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, the rental properties, everything went to Kevin. For me, a single paragraph. To my daughter Grace, I leave my blessing and good wishes for her marriage. Her husband will provide for her as is proper. Women need love, not property. Her husband. I'm 34, single, and run my own consulting firm. I make 3 times what my father made before he retired. Kevin lives in Dad's basement and sells collectible cards online maybe twice a month. I drove to the hospital shaking. Dad was awake, watching TV. Found your will, I said. He didn't even look guilty. You weren't supposed to see that yet. Yet? When was I supposed to see it? After you died and left me nothing. You don't need anything. You'll marry eventually. I'm 34 with my own business. That's probably why you're not married. Too independent. Men don't like that. Kevin doesn't even have a job. He's building his online presence. He's playing World of Warcraft 14 hours a day. He needs support. You don't. You're smart, pretty enough. Someone will marry you. Pretty enough? You know what I mean. You're not going to be alone forever. But if I am? If I never marry? He actually laughed. Don't be ridiculous. Every woman gets married eventually. Even your Aunt Beverly found someone, and she was 42 with a lazy eye. This is about Kevin being a son and me being a daughter. Sons carry the family name. Daughters take new names. It's how things work. My business is literally registered under our family name. That's different. That's temporary. Until you become someone's wife. I left the hospital and went straight to Kevin's room in Dad's basement. He was exactly where I knew he'd be. Headset on, empty energy drink cans everywhere. Did you know? I shouted over his game. He paused it, annoyed. Know what? About Dad's will. Everything goes to you. His face didn't change. Makes sense. I'm the son. You're unemployed. I'm between opportunities. For 6 years? The economy's tough. I offered you a job at my company. Twice. I don't want handouts from my sister. But you'll take everything from Dad? That's different. That's inheritance. That's traditional. Traditional? You're 36 living in his basement. And you're 34 pretending to be a man in the business world. Pretending? I have 12 employees. For now. Until you have babies and quit. I'm not having babies. I'm building an empire. Sure you are. He put his headset back on and returned to his game. I spent the next week going through Dad's finances. The house alone was worth $800,000. The rental properties brought in $10,000 a month. The investments totaled $2 million. All going to Kevin. Kevin who hadn't paid rent in 6 years. Kevin who ate Dad's food, used Dad's electricity, drove Dad's car. I visited Dad again when he was stronger. I want to talk about the will. Nothing to discuss. It's done. It's wrong. My father did the same. Everything to my brother. Your mother understood. Mom died before she could see it. She wouldn't have complained. She knew her place. Her place? She was a nurse. She made more than you for 20 years. And she came home and cooked dinner every night. Like a proper wife. I cooked dinner too. For myself. In my own house. That I bought. That's the problem. You should be cooking for a husband. Kevin doesn't even cook for himself. Orders takeout with Dad's credit card. He's a bachelor. That's different. How is it different? Men need inheritance to attract wives. Women need to be wives to access inheritance. That's insane. That's reality. No man wants to marry a woman richer than him. I'm protecting you from being alone. By ensuring I have nothing. By ensuring you need someone. I don't need anyone. I've been supporting myself since college. And look where it's gotten you. Alone at 34. That night I called my lawyer friend Giselle. Told her everything. Can he do this? Legally? Yes. He can leave everything to whoever he wants. Even if it's blatantly sexist? Even then. But Grace, there might be something else to consider. What? Your mom's will. Did she have one? I sat up straighter on my couch, Giselle's question hanging in the air between us. Mom's will. I hadn't thought about it in years. Dad handled everything after she died. All the paperwork and accounts and legal stuff. I just assumed there wasn't much to handle. She was a nurse, made good money, but Dad always managed their finances. Or so I thought. Then something clicked in my memory. Mom kept important papers in a safety deposit box at the bank downtown. She mentioned it once when I was in college. Said it was where she kept things separate and safe. I never asked what that meant. Never thought to look after she died because Dad said he took care of everything. Now I wondered what else he'd taken care of by ignoring it completely. I told Giselle about the box, and she went quiet for a second. Then she said we needed to get into that box as soon as possible. She'd come with me for legal support. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called the bank where Mom worked for 30 years. The woman who answered transferred me to the manager. His name was something generic. I forget now. But his voice got warm when I explained who I was. He remembered my mother. Said she was always kind to everyone. Never complained even when customers were difficult. He confirmed there was a safety deposit box in her name, but I'd need her death certificate and my identification to access it. He could schedule me for Friday afternoon if I could get the documents together by then. I said yes immediately. Then I hung up and realized I had no idea where Mom's death certificate was. Probably in Dad's files. The same files where I found his will that cut me out of everything. I spent the next 2 days playing detective in my own family history. Wednesday, I drove back to Dad's house while he was still in the hospital. Kevin's door was closed, game sounds coming through. I went straight to Dad's office and searched every drawer and file cabinet. Found the death certificate in a folder marked Francesca Final, which made my stomach hurt. Also found Mom's old passport, her nursing license, her birth certificate, everything I'd need. I took copies of everything and left before Kevin could ask what I was doing. Thursday, I had 3 client meetings at my consulting firm. I tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering to that safety deposit box. What had Mom kept separate and safe? June noticed during our second meeting. The client had just left when she closed the door and asked what was wrong. I told her everything. About Dad's will. About Kevin getting everything. About the safety deposit box I was going to open tomorrow. June's face went red. She actually stood up and paced around the conference room. She said my father was living in 1950, and someone needed to drag him into reality. She reminded me that I built this business from nothing, that I offered Kevin jobs twice, real positions with real salaries, and he couldn't even show up on time for the interviews. She said Kevin was a lazy user and Dad was a sexist fool. Then she asked what she could do to help. I said just knowing she had my back was enough. She hugged me hard, said I was the strongest person she knew and my mom would be proud. I cried a little then. First time I'd cried about any of this. Friday afternoon finally came. Giselle met me at the bank at 3. We went down to the vault room with the manager. He checked my documents twice. Then he pulled out this long metal box from the wall, left us alone in a private room. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were papers, a will, life insurance policies, and a letter. Handwritten, addressed to me. I recognized Mom's writing immediately. That careful print she always used. The tears started before I even opened it. Giselle put her hand on my shoulder, asked if I wanted privacy. I shook my head. Needed her there. Needed a witness to whatever I was about to find. Mom's will was dated 3 months before she died. I read it twice to make sure I understood. She left me her personal savings account, her grandmother's jewelry that I remembered her wearing on special occasions, and her portion of a small beach condo I didn't even know existed. Everything was listed specifically. Just for me. Not for Dad. Not for Kevin. Just Grace. The letter explained why. She wrote that she knew Dad would try to cut me out, that his old-fashioned views about women and property would mean I'd get nothing unless she protected me. So she made sure I'd have something of hers, something he couldn't take away or give to Kevin instead. She wanted me to have security, to have something that was mine by right, not by marriage or luck or Dad's approval. Giselle read through the documents while I read the letter again. She pointed to a section in the will about separate property, asked if I knew what that meant. I shook my head. She explained that Mom had set up a legal arrangement before she married Dad. It kept certain assets separate, not joint, not community property, just hers, which meant Dad never had any legal claim to these specific things. The savings account had about $80,000 in it. The jewelry was worth maybe $30,000. The beach condo was worth close to $200,000. Giselle did the math quickly. About $300,000 total. All legally mine. All protected from Dad's will because they were never his to give away in the first place. I took the letter home that night, sat on my couch and read it 5 more times. Cried for real this time. The first real crying since I found Dad's will. Mom wrote that she was proud of me. Of my independence. Of my business success. She said she saw herself in me. That she understood what it was like to be capable and strong, but still treated as less than she knew Dad's traditional views would cause problems after she was gone. She'd watched him favor Kevin their whole childhood. Watched him make excuses for Kevin's laziness while criticizing my ambition. She wrote that she loved Dad, but she didn't trust him to treat us equally. So she did what she could to protect me. To make sure I had something that was mine alone. The letter had one more thing that made me angry and grateful at the same time. Mom wrote that Dad tried to pressure her into putting everything in joint accounts. He said married people shouldn't have separate money, that it showed a lack of trust. But Mom refused. She told him she needed her own accounts because she'd seen too many women left with nothing when their husbands died or divorced them. Dad didn't like it, but he eventually stopped pushing. Mom wrote that she knew he'd try to cut me out of his will someday. She'd heard him talk about sons carrying the family name, about daughters not needing property because their husbands would provide, so she made her own plans, protected her own assets, made sure I'd have resources even if Dad treated Kevin as the only child who mattered. Giselle called me Saturday morning, said she'd scheduled a meeting with Joseph for Monday. He was her law partner. specialized in estate law. She'd already sent him copies of both wills and explained the situation. He wanted to review everything in person. Confirm that Mom's separate property really did belong to me regardless of what Dad's will said. Giselle sounded confident, but I was nervous. What if there was some loophole? What if Dad had found a way to claim Mom's assets anyway? Giselle told me to stop worrying. Said the documents were clear. Mom had done everything right. Protected everything properly. Dad never had legal claim to these assets. They were never his to distribute, which meant his will couldn't touch them. They were mine. They'd always been mine. I just hadn't known it until now. Monday morning, I met Giselle and Joseph at their law firm downtown. Joseph had both wills spread across his conference table, along with a stack of financial documents he'd requested from the bank over the weekend. He looked up when we walked in, and his expression told me he'd found something bad. Giselle introduced us, and Joseph shook my hand with the careful grip of someone delivering unwelcome news. He gestured to the chair across from him and started talking before I even sat down. He'd been reviewing Dad's will line by line against Mom's separate property documentation and found something that changed everything. Dad had listed Mom's beach condo in his will as part of his estate. The problem was the condo was never his property to distribute. Mom bought it 30 years ago with her inheritance money and kept it in her name only under the separate property arrangement. Joseph showed me the deed with Mom's name alone, and then showed me Dad's will listing the same property as his asset. So Dad had been treating my property like it belonged to him for 4 years. Then Joseph pulled out rental records from the property management company. The beach condo had been rented continuously since Mom died. Every single month for 4 years, a tenant paid $1,500 in rent. Joseph had the bank statements showing where that money went. Straight into Dad's personal checking account. Not a joint account. Not an estate account. His personal account that he used for his own expenses. I sat there doing the math in my head. 1,500 times 12 months times 4 years, $72,000. Dad had stolen $72,000 from me. I said the number out loud and my voice sounded strange and flat. Joseph nodded and said that was exactly right. $72,000 in stolen rental income, plus we could argue for interest and possibly punitive damages given the intentional nature of the theft. Giselle put her hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. I kept thinking about Dad in that hospital bed talking about how women don't need property. He'd been collecting rent on my property the whole time, using my money while telling me I didn't deserve an inheritance because some future husband would provide for me. Joseph explained this was financial exploitation of Mom's estate and conversion of my assets for Dad's personal use. In simpler terms, Dad had committed theft. We could demand full repayment with interest, and this made any legal challenge to his will much stronger because it showed a pattern of disregarding property rights and legal ownership. A judge would not look kindly on someone who stole from their daughter's inheritance while simultaneously trying to cut her out of his own will. Giselle said we needed to decide our next move carefully. We could file legal action immediately and force repayment through the courts. Or we could approach Dad first and give him a chance to make things right voluntarily. Joseph said judges usually appreciate good faith attempts at family resolution before litigation. It shows we tried to solve things privately before involving the court system. I laughed at that and it came out bitter and sharp. Dad wasn't going to make anything right. He'd spent 4 years stealing from me while lecturing me about traditional values and proper behavior for women. Giselle said she understood my skepticism, but we should try anyway. Even if Dad refused to cooperate, the attempt would strengthen our legal position. We could show we acted reasonably, while Dad acted unreasonably. I agreed, but only because it made strategic sense, not because I thought Dad would suddenly develop a conscience. We scheduled a hospital visit for that afternoon. Giselle would come with me as my legal representative, and we'd present Dad with the evidence of his theft. Give him a chance to acknowledge what he'd done and discuss repayment. Joseph said to expect denial and defensiveness, but to stay calm and factual. Let the documents speak for themselves. I drove to the hospital with Giselle following in her own car. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, and I kept rehearsing what I'd say. Found Mom's will. Found the separate property documentation. Found proof you've been stealing rental income from my beach condo for 4 years. $72,000 you took from me while telling me I didn't deserve property. We walked into Dad's hospital room together, and his face changed the second he saw Giselle in her business suit carrying a briefcase. He knew immediately this wasn't a social visit. His expression went from surprise to hard and closed off. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I told him we'd found Mom's will and discovered he'd been collecting rental income from my inherited property for 4 years without telling me. Dad's response came fast, like he'd been preparing for this conversation. He said Mom's assets became his when she died because that's how marriage works. Everything wives own becomes their husband's property. Giselle stepped forward and corrected him in her professional lawyer voice. She explained separate property law and how Mom had specifically protected certain assets to remain hers alone. Giselle pulled out Mom's documentation, showing the legal arrangements Mom made before they married. The beach condo was Mom's separate property. It was never Dad's. It was never community property. When Mom died, it went directly to me as her designated heir. Dad had no legal claim to it or its rental income. Ever. Dad's face got red and he said that was ridiculous. He'd been managing the property for 4 years. Someone had to handle the tenants and maintenance. He deserved compensation for his time and effort. I asked him when he planned to tell me about my property, or the rental income he'd been collecting. He didn't answer that. Instead, he said he used the money for family expenses, and I benefited from it indirectly. I felt my anger spike hot and sharp. I pointed out that I hadn't lived in his house for 12 years. I built my own life without his financial support. I bought my own house and started my own business and paid my own bills. Whatever family expenses he claimed to have didn't include me. That money was mine, and he spent it on himself and Kevin. The conversation escalated when I said the actual number. $72,000. That's how much he owed me for 4 years of stolen rental income. Dad's face went from red to almost purple. He said he didn't owe me anything. He raised me for 18 years, fed me and clothed me and paid for my education. That was worth more than any money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Giselle tried to redirect the discussion toward resolution. She suggested Dad could acknowledge my rightful inheritance and adjust his will to reflect fair treatment. She said we could work out a repayment plan for the rental income and avoid litigation if Dad was willing to make things right. Dad refused outright. He said changing his will would mean admitting he was wrong, and he was never wrong about family matters. His father did the same thing, and his grandfather before that. Sons inherit. Daughters get married. That's how proper families work. I felt something break inside me. Some last hope that Dad might see me as equal to Kevin. I told him Mom knew exactly what he'd do. That's why she protected assets for me separately. Mom knew Dad would try to cut me out, so she made her own plans. Dad looked genuinely shocked. He said he couldn't believe Mom would go behind his back like that. After 40 years of marriage, she didn't trust him to do right by their daughter. I said Mom was smart to protect her assets because look what happened. The second she died, Dad started treating her property like his own. He'd been stealing from me for 4 years while preaching about traditional values and women's proper place. Dad didn't understand that Mom's property was always her own. He still thought marriage gave him automatic rights to everything his wife owned. Even after Giselle showed him the legal documents, he couldn't accept that Mom had the right to keep anything separate from him. Dad's face turned red and his voice got louder when he started talking about Mom again. He said she betrayed him by hiding money and property, that she poisoned me against family values, that a good wife doesn't keep secrets from her husband. I felt my anger spike hot and immediate. I told him Mom earned more than him for 20 years while still cooking dinner every night, doing all the laundry, managing the household, and never complaining about his outdated ideas. She did everything he demanded and still protected herself because she knew exactly what he'd do. Dad tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I said Mom worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, then came home to a second shift of cooking and cleaning, while he watched TV and complained if dinner wasn't ready on time. She knew her worth even if he never recognized it. Giselle touched my arm gently, trying to calm me down, but I was done being calm. Dad said I was being disrespectful and ungrateful, that Mom would be ashamed of how I was acting. I laughed at that because Mom left me everything she could specifically to protect me from him. She saw this coming years ago. The conversation exploded from there. Dad's heart monitor started beeping faster, and a nurse came in to check on him. Giselle stood up and gathered her papers. Dad pointed at the door and told us to get out. Said he didn't want to see me until I apologized for dishonoring my mother's memory. I grabbed my bag and walked out without another word. Giselle followed me into the hallway and we stood by the elevators while I tried to stop shaking. She said we made a good faith effort at resolution like the courts require. We tried talking, we showed him the documents, we gave him a chance to make things right. He refused every option, and now we had legal justification to take stronger action. She'd have Joseph start filing paperwork immediately to reclaim my rental income and establish my ownership of Mom's property. I nodded and pressed the elevator button 3 times, even though it was already lit up. I spent the rest of the week trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to Dad in that hospital bed, his face red with anger, still refusing to admit he'd done anything wrong. June noticed during our Friday staff meeting and asked if I was okay. I told her about the hospital visit, and she said my father sounded like he belonged in the 1950s, not the 21st century. That weekend, I cleaned my apartment and tried not to think about family. Saturday afternoon, my phone rang with Kevin's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He sounded different from usual, less cocky, almost nervous. He said we needed to talk about Dad and the will situation. I asked what there was to talk about since he'd already made it clear he thought the inheritance distribution was fair. Kevin sighed and said he'd been thinking about everything, that maybe we could work something out. He used phrases like family harmony and Dad's recovery and unnecessary stress. I recognized Dad's words coming out of Kevin's mouth. I asked Kevin directly if he knew about Mom's separate property before this week. He was quiet for a few seconds, then admitted Dad mentioned the beach condo a while back, but said it was complicated. Kevin didn't ask questions because he figured Dad understood the legal stuff better than he did. I asked when Dad told him. Kevin said maybe 2 years ago when Dad started talking about updating his will. So Kevin knew for 2 years that Mom left me property, and never said anything. Kevin got defensive and said it wasn't his job to manage Dad's estate or track Mom's old assets. I pointed out that he had no problem accepting everything Dad was leaving him without asking questions about where it came from. Kevin changed the subject and said he'd been counting on his inheritance for some things. I asked what things. He hesitated, then admitted he had some financial issues that the inheritance would solve. I asked how much. He said about $40,000. I actually laughed out loud at that. $40,000 in debt while living rent-free with zero expenses. Kevin's voice got tight and angry. He said his online business required investment and he bought gaming equipment and collectible cards that would increase in value over time. Some of the investments didn't work out the way he expected, but that was just how business worked. I asked how he accumulated $40,000 in debt without a job or income. Kevin said Dad's credit cards mostly, plus some personal loans he took out using Dad's house as collateral since he lived there. He'd been making minimum payments with money from selling cards online, but the interest kept piling up. Dad promised the inheritance would come through soon enough to cover everything and get him back to zero. I felt sick hearing this. Dad had been enabling Kevin's spending for years while preaching to me about financial responsibility and women needing husbands to manage money. Kevin said Dad understood that building a business takes time and investment. I said buying video game equipment wasn't building a business, it was shopping with someone else's credit card. Kevin's tone shifted to bargaining. He said maybe we could work something out where we split Dad's estate equally. I'd get half of everything and drop the issue about Mom's separate property. Then everyone would be happy, and we could move forward as a family. I told him Mom's assets were never Dad's to split. They were always mine from the moment Mom died. Dad stole rental income from my property for 4 years, and I wanted every penny back with interest. Kevin said I was being unreasonable since I already had a successful business and didn't need the money. I said this wasn't about need. It was about what was legally and morally mine. Mom specifically left me those assets because she knew Dad would try exactly this. I wasn't negotiating away what Mom protected for me just to bail Kevin out of debt he created by buying worthless collectibles instead of getting a job. Kevin said the collectibles weren't worthless. Some of them were rare and valuable. I asked if they were. So valuable, why was he $40,000 in debt? He didn't have an answer for that. The call started falling apart fast. Kevin said I was abandoning family when things got tough. That blood should matter more than money. I reminded him I offered him actual jobs with real salaries twice. He could have been working at my company for the past 3 years, making decent money and building real skills. Instead, he chose video games and online card sales, and now he was shocked that choices had consequences. His financial crisis was completely self-created, and I wasn't responsible for fixing it. Kevin said I sounded just like Dad, cold and judgmental. I said that was funny coming from someone who agreed I deserved nothing just because I was born female. At least I earned everything I had instead of waiting for handouts from family members. Kevin called me some names I won't repeat and hung up. I sat on my couch staring at my phone and realized I'd lost both my father and brother in the same week. It hurt, but it also felt like relief. Monday morning, I met with Joseph at Giselle's law firm. He'd been reviewing all the documents over the weekend and had paperwork ready to file. He explained he was filing 2 separate claims. First, a formal claim against Dad's estate for $72,000 in stolen rental income plus interest and legal fees. Second, paperwork establishing my legal ownership of Mom's separate property, including the beach condo, her savings account, and her jewelry collection. The filings would go to the county courthouse that afternoon, and copies would be served to Dad's estate attorney. Joseph said the case was straightforward since we had all the documentation proving Mom's separate property status. The harder part might be collecting the stolen rental income since Dad had already spent most of it. We might need to put a lien on his assets or work out a payment plan from the estate. I told Joseph to do whatever was necessary. I was done being nice about this. 3 days later, Joseph called to say Dad's estate attorney Tristan Mahoney had contacted him. Tristan admitted he wasn't aware of Mom's separate property arrangements when he drafted Dad's will. He'd relied on Dad's representation of assets, and Dad never mentioned that the beach condo wasn't actually his to leave to anyone. Tristan reviewed the documents we provided, and agreed the condo was improperly included in Dad's estate inventory. He wanted to schedule a meeting with all parties to discuss resolution. Joseph said he'd agree to a meeting but made it clear we weren't backing down on any of our claims. Mom's property was mine and Dad owed me 4 years of rental income. Those facts weren't negotiable. I asked Joseph what he thought would happen. He said most likely Tristan would try to negotiate a settlement to avoid expensive litigation. Dad's estate would remove the beach condo from the will, acknowledge my ownership, and probably offer some kind of payment plan for the stolen rental income. I asked if we'd get everything we were owed. Joseph said probably not all at once, but eventually yes. The law was clearly on our side. The meeting happened sooner than I expected. Tristan called Joseph 2 days after receiving our filings and said he wanted to sit down with everyone to work things out. Joseph told me about the call while we reviewed paperwork in his office. Tristan proposed we meet at his firm to discuss the property issues and maybe renegotiate Dad's will. Joseph agreed to the meeting but made it clear we weren't backing down on Mom's separate property or the stolen rental income. Those facts weren't up for discussion. I asked Joseph what he thought Tristan wanted. Joseph said most likely Dad was realizing the legal fight would cost more than just settling, but we needed to be prepared for Dad to try making conditions. Before the meeting, I decided to visit the beach condo. I'd never been there since Mom died. Dad handled everything after her funeral, and I was too busy building my company to ask questions about her properties. The address was in Mom's files, about 40 minutes from my office near the coast. I drove there on a Saturday morning and parked in front of a small 2-story building with weathered blue siding. The current tenants were a young family. I knocked on the door, and a woman in her late 20s answered with a toddler on her hip. I introduced myself and explained I was the actual owner. Her face went pale. She called her husband and they both looked panicked. They'd been living there for 2 years and paying rent every month to a property manager. They had no idea they were paying my father instead of me. I told them not to worry, they weren't in trouble. I just wanted to see the place. The husband let me inside and I walked through slowly. The condo had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen with old appliances. The carpet was worn in the hallways. The bathroom had water stains on the ceiling that nobody had fixed. The kitchen cabinets were original from 30 years ago. When Mom bought the place, I asked the tenants if they'd ever requested repairs. They said yes, multiple times. But the property manager always said the owner didn't approve the budget for updates. The owner, meaning Dad. He'd been collecting $1,500 monthly for 4 years while refusing to spend anything on maintenance. The tenants were good people keeping the place clean despite its age. I told them I'd be making changes to the management situation soon, and they'd hear from me. They seemed relieved. I walked through one more time and felt angry all over again. Mom bought this place 30 years ago with her own money as an investment for our family's future. She probably imagined it would help me someday. Instead, Dad treated it like his personal cash machine while letting it fall apart. The meeting with Tristan was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon at his law office downtown. Joseph and I arrived together. Giselle came too for support even though Joseph was handling the legal side. Tristan's office was fancy with dark wood furniture and big windows overlooking the city. Tristan was in his 50s, gray hair, expensive suit. He shook our hands and offered coffee, which we all declined. We sat around a conference table and Tristan opened a folder with documents. He started by saying he'd reviewed everything we submitted and acknowledged the beach condo was improperly included in Dad's estate. He admitted he'd relied on Dad's information when drafting the will, and Dad never mentioned Mom's separate property arrangements. Then Tristan presented what he called a reasonable solution. Dad would acknowledge the separate property and return the rental income if I agreed not to challenge his will's distribution to Kevin. Joseph cut him off immediately. He said those were completely unrelated issues that couldn't be legally tied together. Mom's property was always mine regardless of Dad's will. The stolen rental income was a separate matter of financial misconduct. We weren't negotiating away my rights to get back what was already mine. I spoke up then because I wanted Tristan to hear it directly from me. I told him I wasn't interested in Dad's money anymore. What I wanted was acknowledgement that Mom's assets were always mine. I wanted repayment of the stolen income. And I wanted Dad to understand that his sexist values cost him a relationship with his daughter. Tristan looked uncomfortable. He shifted papers around and cleared his throat. Then he admitted something that made my blood boil. Dad had refused to attend this meeting or authorize any real negotiation. Dad instructed Tristan to handle it, but wouldn't compromise on the will because that would mean admitting women deserve equal inheritance. Tristan actually said those words out loud. He looked embarrassed, but he said it. I couldn't believe Dad was so committed to his discrimination that he wouldn't even show up to defend it himself. Joseph opened his own folder and pulled out bank statements and transaction records. He'd been doing more digging into Dad's finances over the past few days. Joseph presented evidence that went beyond the rental income theft. Dad had been using Kevin's future inheritance to pay Kevin's credit card bills for the past 2 years. Regular transfers from Dad's investment accounts directly to Kevin's credit cards. Thousands of dollars every few months. Joseph laid out the statements showing the pattern. The estate was worth a lot less than Dad's will suggested, because Dad kept bailing Kevin out of debt he created through online purchases and gaming equipment. Joseph argued this showed Dad's will was based on false premises about the estate's value and Kevin's needs versus his abilities. Tristan looked genuinely disturbed as he reviewed the bank statements. He said he wasn't aware of the ongoing transfers to Kevin. Dad never mentioned supporting Kevin financially when they discussed the estate planning. Tristan made notes and his jaw was tight. Joseph pressed the point. He said the whole will was built on Dad's assumption that Kevin needed support, and I didn't. But the evidence showed Kevin was actively draining the estate while I'd been supporting myself for over a decade. The will didn't reflect reality. It reflected Dad's outdated beliefs about gender roles. The meeting went on for another hour with Tristan asking questions and Joseph providing more documentation. Finally, Tristan said he needed to review everything thoroughly and provide a formal response within 2 weeks. He gathered his papers and stood up to end the meeting. As we were leaving, Tristan pulled Giselle aside in the hallway. I could hear him tell her quietly that he was uncomfortable with the gender discrimination aspect of Dad's position. He said he thought Dad's stance was legally and morally wrong, but Dad was his client, and he had to represent him. Giselle thanked him for his honesty. We left the building, and I felt exhausted. 2 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Kevin, and he was crying. Dad had another heart episode during the night and was back in intensive care. Kevin's voice was shaking. He begged me to come to the hospital and make peace with Dad before something worse happened. He said Dad kept asking for me, and the stress of our fight was killing him. I sat on my couch holding the phone and didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the hospital and fix everything like I always did. The other part knew that rushing to Dad's bedside would just prove his point that women exist to smooth things over and make men comfortable. I called June instead. She answered on the first ring, and I told her about Kevin's call and the guilt eating at me. June's response was immediate and firm. She reminded me that Dad created this whole situation by writing a discriminatory will, and refusing to acknowledge my worth as his daughter. His stress came from facing consequences for his own choices, not from anything I did wrong. I wasn't responsible for protecting him from the natural results of treating me as less valuable than Kevin, simply because of my gender. June said if I wanted to visit Dad, I should do it for myself, not because Kevin guilted me into it, and definitely not to make peace by accepting unfair treatment. Her words helped me think more clearly about what I actually wanted, versus what family obligation demanded. I thanked her and called Giselle next. Giselle listened to the situation, and gave me the legal perspective. Visiting Dad now could be seen as weakening my position because it might look like I was backing down, or willing to compromise on Mom's separate property to maintain family harmony. But she also said the legal case was strong enough that one hospital visit wouldn't destroy it, and ultimately I had to decide whether family reconciliation mattered more to me than the money. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds before I knew my answer. I wanted to see Dad, but I wasn't going alone or unprotected. Giselle agreed to come with me as a witness to whatever was said. We drove to the hospital together the next morning. Dad was in a regular room this time, not intensive care, which meant the heart episode was minor. He looked small in the hospital bed with monitors beeping and an IV in his arm. For just a moment, I felt the old instinct kick in, the one that made me want to protect him and smooth everything over, so we could go back to being a family. Then Dad saw Giselle standing beside me and his face hardened. He asked why I brought a lawyer to visit my sick father. Before I could answer, he launched into how I was killing him with stress over my mother's scheming and her secret will that went behind his back. The protective instinct evaporated instantly. I pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down. I told him calmly that Mom didn't scheme. She protected her own assets because she knew his values about women and property would lead exactly to this situation. I said I loved him, but I couldn't accept being treated as less valuable than Kevin, simply because of my gender. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about him seeing me as a full person deserving of equal respect and equal inheritance. Dad's face got red despite the heart monitor. He insisted he wasn't sexist, he was traditional, and there was a big difference between discrimination and following proper family structure. I asked him directly to explain how leaving everything to an unemployed son while giving nothing to a successful daughter was anything other than gender discrimination. I waited for his answer. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He tried to start a sentence about sons and family legacy, but stopped because he couldn't finish it without admitting the sexism out loud. Giselle stood quietly by the door taking notes. The silence stretched out until we heard footsteps in the hallway. Kevin rushed into the room still wearing his gaming headset around his neck. He immediately went to Dad's side and told me I was being cruel to argue with a sick man about money. I turned to face Kevin directly. I asked him if he honestly thought it was fair that he got everything despite contributing nothing while I got nothing, despite supporting myself completely for over a decade. Did he really believe he deserved Dad's entire estate just for being born male? Kevin fell back on the sons carry the family name argument like it was a shield. I pointed out that my business was literally registered under our family name and employed 12 people who all saw our name on their paychecks. His online card sales hadn't generated actual income in months, according to the bank records Joseph found. Which one of us was really carrying the family name forward? Kevin's face went red, but he didn't have an answer. Dad tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I told both of them I was moving forward with legal action. I would reclaim Mom's property and the stolen rental income because it was legally mine and morally right. I was done trying to make them see my worth because Mom already saw it and protected me accordingly. Her faith in me mattered more than Dad's conditional approval ever could. Giselle and I left the hospital room without waiting for a response. Over the next month, Joseph negotiated with Tristan about returning my rental income. The documentation was clear, and Tristan knew they couldn't win that fight. Dad's health improved slowly, but he refused all of Joseph's settlement offers. Tristan actually called Joseph privately to say the estate case was weak, and he'd recommended Dad settle to avoid expensive legal fees, but Dad refused on principle. He'd rather pay lawyers than admit his will was wrong. I focused on my consulting firm and tried not to think about the family I was losing. Then Kevin's creditors started calling Dad's house more aggressively. One credit card company sent a formal letter threatening legal action. If Kevin didn't start making payments on the $40,000 he owed, Kevin panicked because he'd been counting on inheritance money that was now tied up in legal disputes and might not come at all. Dad had to face the reality that bailing Kevin out had drained the estate significantly, and continuing to fight me in court was making everything worse. The house phone rang constantly with collection calls. Kevin stopped answering it. I walked into the office Monday morning and June was already there with coffee waiting. She pushed a cup toward me and asked if I'd thought about her suggestion from last week. I knew what she meant without her saying it directly. The Kevin thing. Hiring him one more time to give him a real chance at turning things around, I told her no and meant it. She raised her eyebrows and waited for me to explain. I said I'd spent 34 years watching Dad protect Kevin from every consequence, and it never helped him grow. Kevin needed to face what happened when you didn't work for 6 years and racked up $40,000 in debt. Bailing him out now would just teach him someone would always save him. June nodded slowly and said she understood, but it was hard watching family struggle. I agreed it was hard, but pointed out that real family support meant letting people learn from mistakes, not preventing them from happening. Kevin had turned down 2 actual job offers from me because he didn't want handouts from his sister. Now he wanted Dad's inheritance to solve everything. That wasn't growth, that was just waiting for a different kind of handout. June squeezed my shoulder and said I was probably right, but she could see it hurt me anyway. I admitted it did hurt, but I was done protecting people who refused to protect themselves. 3 weeks later, Joseph called to say the court date was set for the rental income claim. He asked if I wanted to attend, and I said absolutely. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about establishing that Dad couldn't steal from me without consequences. The morning of the hearing, I wore my best business suit and met Joseph outside the courthouse. He had 3 boxes of financial records documenting every rental payment that went into Dad's account instead of mine. Tristan showed up alone and told Joseph that Dad wasn't coming due to health concerns. His doctor said the stress would be too much after the recent heart episodes. Joseph accepted this without argument. We went inside and the judge called the case. Tristan presented Dad's defense, which basically claimed the rental income was used for family benefit over the years. He suggested I'd indirectly benefited from Dad's financial stability. Even though I hadn't lived at home in 12 years, Joseph stood up and systematically destroyed this argument with bank records. He showed the judge that $72,000 went into Dad's personal account from my property. Then he showed Dad's spending records proving the money went toward Kevin's credit card payments, Kevin's car insurance, and Kevin's various gaming equipment purchases. None of it benefited me in any way. The judge asked Tristan if he had any evidence that I'd received benefit from these funds. Tristan admitted he didn't. The judge asked if Dad had my permission to collect rent from my inherited property. Tristan said no, but argued that Dad believed he had a right to the property. Joseph interrupted and presented Mom's will with the separate property documentation. The judge read through it carefully while the courtroom stayed quiet. The judge looked up and said the law was clear on this matter. Mom's separate property belonged to me upon her death. Dad had no legal right to collect income from my property. The fact that he did so for 4 years without my knowledge or consent constituted conversion of assets. The judge ruled in my favor and ordered Dad's estate to repay $72,000 plus 4 years of interest at the statutory rate. He calculated this came to about $81,000 total. Then he added legal fees, which brought the total to $85,000. The judge also formally established my ownership of all Mom's separate property, including the beach condo, the savings account, and the jewelry. He said this ruling was entered into public record, and any future estate proceedings must acknowledge these assets as mine alone. Tristan looked defeated. Joseph shook my hand. I felt something release in my chest that had been tight since finding Dad's will. This wasn't about the money. It was about someone in authority finally saying that what Dad did was wrong. We walked out of the courthouse and Joseph said he'd file the paperwork to collect the judgment from Dad's estate. I asked how long it would take, and he said probably 2 months to process everything. I thanked him for his work, and he said it was the easiest case he'd handled in months because the evidence was so clear. Tristan caught up with us in the parking lot. He asked if he could speak to me privately. Joseph said he'd wait by the car. Tristan looked uncomfortable and said Dad was very upset about the ruling. I said Dad should have thought about that before stealing from me. Tristan agreed and said he'd actually advised Dad to settle weeks ago, but Dad refused. Now the legal fees had cost the estate almost as much as the judgment itself. I shrugged and said that was Dad's choice. Tristan said Dad wanted to talk about modifying his will. Not because his views had changed, Tristan was clear about that, but because the legal fees were draining the estate and Kevin wouldn't inherit much if the fighting continued. I asked if Dad was actually willing to change the will, or just wanted me to drop everything. Tristan admitted Dad was offering to split the estate 60-40 in Kevin's favor. I laughed and said no. Tristan looked surprised. He said 60-40 was a significant compromise given Dad's beliefs. I told Tristan that Dad's beliefs were wrong and I wasn't negotiating with sexism. Tristan said he understood but suggested I think about it before rejecting the offer completely. I said I'd already thought about it for weeks, and my answer wouldn't change. Joseph called me 2 days later and said Tristan had reached out officially about a meeting. Dad wanted to discuss the will modification with me present. Joseph asked if I wanted to do it, and I said yes, but only with Giselle there as witness. I wasn't walking into another hospital room alone with Dad. Joseph arranged everything for the following Tuesday. I told June where I was going, and she offered to come along for support. I said no, because this needed to be just family and lawyers. June hugged me and said to call her immediately after Tuesday arrived, and I met Giselle outside the hospital. We went up to Dad's room together. He was sitting up in bed looking thinner than last time, but alert. Kevin was there too, slouched in the visitor chair playing something on his phone. Dad saw Giselle and his face hardened. I said she was staying because I wanted a witness to whatever happened. Dad said this was family business. I replied that he'd made it legal business when he wrote his will. Giselle sat down in the corner with her notepad. Kevin finally looked up from his phone and asked why I was making this so difficult. I ignored him and focused on Dad. Dad said Tristan had explained the court ruling and the financial impact on the estate. He said he was willing to be reasonable about the distribution if I stopped fighting. I asked what reasonable meant. Dad said he'd split his estate 60-40 with Kevin getting the larger share. He called this generous given his beliefs about inheritance. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I told Dad I didn't want his money anymore. His face showed confusion, like he couldn't process what I'd said. I explained that Mom's property was enough for me. The beach condo, the savings, the jewelry. All of it was more valuable because Mom specifically chose to protect it for me. That meant more than any amount of Dad's money could. Dad said I was being emotional and not thinking clearly. I said I was thinking more clearly than I had in years. Accepting 60% of his estate would mean accepting his basic premise that I was worth less than Kevin. I refused to validate his sexism, even for financial gain. Dad started to argue, but I held up my hand. I said Mom's faith in me was worth more than his conditional approval. She saw my worth when he never would. That was enough. Kevin jumped in and said I was being stupid to turn down money out of pride. I turned to look at him directly. I asked if he honestly thought Dad's offer was fair. Kevin said 60-40 was better than I deserved given that sons traditionally inherit everything. I felt my jaw tighten. I told Kevin that his entire life had been subsidized by Dad's money and Mom's unpaid labor. He'd never earned anything himself, but he felt entitled to everything. Kevin said I was just jealous that Dad loved him more. I laughed and it came out bitter. I said Dad didn't love him more. Dad just valued him more because of his gender. There was a difference. Kevin said I was making everything about feminism when it was really just about family tradition. I replied that family tradition was just a nice word for discrimination. Giselle shifted in her chair and I could see her taking notes. Dad tried to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. I told Dad I hoped he recovered fully and lived many more years. I genuinely meant that despite everything. But our relationship was changed forever and we both needed to accept it. I couldn't pretend his values didn't hurt me anymore. I was done trying to earn equal treatment that should have been given freely from the start. Dad said I was overreacting and things could go back to normal if I just accepted his offer. I shook my head. Normal meant me constantly proving my worth while Kevin got everything for existing. That wasn't normal. That was broken. I said I was choosing to step away from that dynamic completely. Dad could leave everything to Kevin if that's what he wanted. I had Mom's legacy and my own success. That was enough. Kevin stood up and got in my face. He said I was abandoning family when things got tough. I stepped back and looked at him calmly. I said he abandoned any claim to my respect when he agreed I deserved nothing simply for being female. Family should mean mutual support, not one-sided sacrifice from the daughter. Kevin said I'd always been selfish, and this proved it. I told him that taking care of myself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. He'd spent 6 years waiting for Dad to solve his problems. I'd spent 12 years building a business that employed people and generated real value. We'd made different choices, and those choices had consequences. Kevin said I'd regret this when Dad died, and I got nothing. I said I already had what mattered. Giselle stood up and said we should leave. I agreed. I walked toward the door and Dad called my name. I stopped but didn't turn around. He said I was making a mistake. I said the mistake was his, not mine. He'd had 34 years to see my value and chose not to. That was on him. I left the hospital room with Giselle beside me. The door closed behind us and I felt my hands shaking. Giselle asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know, but I thought I would be eventually. We walked to the elevator in silence. I pressed the button and waited. The doors opened and we stepped inside. Giselle asked if I wanted to get coffee and talk. I said yes. We rode down to the ground floor and walked out into the parking lot. The sun was bright and I had to squint. Giselle unlocked her car and we got in. She started driving toward the coffee shop near her office. I looked out the window and watched the city pass by. This might be the last time I saw Dad while he was alive. That hurt in a way I hadn't expected. But it also felt like freedom from constantly trying to prove something that should have been obvious. I was worth the same as Kevin, regardless of gender. Mom had known that. Dad never would. The following weeks passed in a blur of work and decisions. I threw myself into my consulting firm and June noticed but didn't push. She just made sure I ate lunch and left the office before midnight. The beach condo tenants gave notice they were moving out at the end of the month. I could have found new tenants immediately, but I didn't. Instead, I decided to renovate the property myself. Not hire contractors. Actually do the work with my own hands. June thought I was crazy, but Giselle understood. This was about connecting with Mom's memory through something physical. I drove to the condo on a Saturday morning with a truck full of supplies. The tenants had left it clean but dated. The kitchen cabinets were from the 80s. The bathroom had pink tile. The living room carpet was worn through in spots. I started ripping up carpet and found hardwood underneath. Mom had good taste even when she bought this place 30 years ago. I spent the next 3 weekends sanding floors and painting walls. My hands got blisters and my back ached, but it felt good physical work that produced visible results. Not like fighting with Dad where nothing ever changed. The condo slowly transformed into something that felt like mine and Mom's together. I found an old photo of her tucked behind a cabinet. She was younger than I was now, smiling at the beach with her nurse uniform visible under her jacket. She'd probably stopped here after a shift. I put the photo in a frame on the mantel. Giselle came over the following week while I was painting the bedroom, and we sat on the porch overlooking the ocean, talking about what to do with Mom's assets. She suggested creating a trust that would fund grants for women facing gender discrimination in family or business situations. The idea felt right immediately because it turned Mom's protection of me into protection for other women who needed it. We spent hours that afternoon drafting the trust documents with specific criteria for applicants and a selection committee that would include Giselle, June, and 2 other women attorneys from Giselle's firm. The trust would award grants ranging from $5,000 to $20,000 to help women with legal fees, business startup costs, or education expenses when they face discrimination. I named it the Francesca Rollins Women's Opportunity Trust, and felt Mom would have loved knowing her careful planning helped more than just me. Giselle filed the paperwork within 2 weeks, and we held our first grant review meeting at my office where we were selected 3 recipients from over 40 applications. One woman was fighting her father's estate after being cut out for her brothers. Another needed funding to finish her nursing degree after her husband divorced her and stopped paying tuition. The third was starting a construction business and faced constant discrimination from suppliers and clients who didn't think women belonged in trades. Writing those first 3 checks felt like honoring Mom's memory in the most meaningful way possible. 3 months after the trust launched, Kevin called my cell phone on a Tuesday morning. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. He asked how I was doing in a fake casual tone that meant he wanted something. I waited him out, and finally he admitted he was in trouble with his debts and needed a loan to cover minimum payments before the credit card companies sued him. The total he needed was $15,000. I asked what happened to Dad's financial support, and Kevin said Dad cut him off after the legal battle over Mom's estate drained money for lawyer fees. I felt no satisfaction in Kevin's panic, just tired recognition that he still hadn't learned anything. I told him I wouldn't give him a loan, but I'd offer him a real job at my consulting firm with actual responsibilities and a starting salary of $45,000 per year. He could work in our operations department handling client logistics and scheduling. Kevin's voice went cold, and he said he didn't need charity from his sister. I pointed out that a job wasn't charity, it was earning money through work like normal adults do. He said I was being cruel and enjoying his suffering. I corrected him and explained I was offering the same thing I'd offered twice before when he turned me down because accepting help from a woman hurt his pride. Now he was desperate enough that maybe he'd actually consider it. Kevin called me names I won't repeat and hung up. I deleted his number from my phone and went back to my morning meeting. June and I expanded the consulting firm that summer, adding 6 new employees and taking on corporate clients that tripled our revenue. The beach condo became my weekend retreat where I'd drive Friday evenings and spend 2 days walking the shore and working on my laptop from the deck. Being there made me feel connected to Mom in ways that visiting her grave never did. This was a place she'd chosen and invested in and protected for me. I could picture her here after long nursing shifts watching the sunset and planning for a future where her daughter would have options and security. The consulting firm's success proved I'd built exactly the kind of independent life Mom hoped for me. I wasn't waiting for a husband to provide. I wasn't dependent on Dad's approval or Kevin's opinion. I made my own choices and lived with the consequences and supported myself completely. A year after finding Dad's will, I was running a business with 18 employees managing Mom's beach condo and investment accounts and reviewing grant applications for the Francesca Rollins Trust every quarter. Dad and Kevin rarely contacted me except for awkward birthday texts that I responded to politely but briefly. I'd built a chosen family through June, who became my closest friend, and Giselle, who'd fought beside me and my employees who valued competence regardless of gender. Mom was right to protect my inheritance not because I needed the money, but because I deserved to know at least one parent saw my worth. That knowledge mattered more than any dollar amount. Some nights at the beach condo, I'd look at Mom's photo on the mantle and thank her for believing in me when Dad never would. She'd given me more than property. She'd given me proof that I mattered exactly as I was.